English paper piecing dates back to about the 1700s, 1800s. I didn't invent it, it was already around, and it was a really time-consuming technique. Lots of people did it, but it took such a long time, and people would cut their papers out of old ledgers and old cards and whatever they could get their hands on, and they would cut them out with a pair of scissors. And then, of course, they would use scissors to cut their fabric, whatever fabric they could get their hands on, whether they be old shirts or sheets or dresses or whatever it was, because, they didn't have the luxury of going into a quilt store and buying fabric like we do today. And, of course, then what they would do is they would get their needle and thread, and they would fold the edges over, and they would tack the fabric over the card. Now, there's a couple of problems there to start with. There's one, that the paper wasn't always exact, because when you're drawing something and then you're cutting it out, first there can be error in the drawing, then there can be error in the cutting. If you're cutting one side of the line, or the other side of the line, through the middle of the line, they're all going to be different. So you don't have that perfection like you do today. With our pre-cut paper shapes, the perfection is there because they're die cut. And so they would tack their fabric onto the card, and then, of course, they would sew it together like we do today. However, I've changed all that because I've introduced, much finer needles, longer needles, better thread. I don't work with a cotton thread. I work with a polyester thread because it's much stronger. Your cotton thread will shred dragging over the card. And so when they put their things together, they didn't have the luxury of the needles we have either, so they would use whatever they had, and so they'd have big fat stitches, big fat thread, and you'd look at the other side of the work and you would see those stitches. And, I can even relate back to, I have a quilt in my possession that my grandmother made. She died when she was 102. I didn't even know she was a patchworker until she was 100 because I didn't know. She didn't live in Australia. And I have that quilt in my possession, and I look at it, and as much as I love it, I can see what went wrong. She sewed headcloth to Liberty print, and so, right there was a problem. But the stitches were there, but I love the quilt. And so there was all these little issues, and, for me in Australia, we didn't have a lot of things down there. Like, in the 80s, we didn't have a lot of tools, and we didn't have a lot of knowledge, so we were always sort of looking to America to get all that kind of knowledge to learn this technique. And there wasn't much about English paper piecing anyway, but that's pretty much all I knew. And then, of course, they'd sew them together, you'd see the stitches through on the front, and my mother always used to say, if you can't do it right, don't do it. And I'd look at it and I think, it doesn't look right, can't do it, got to fix it. And so I guess I built my business on things that weren't available in the marketplace down under. And that's how, we got started with the paper shapes. I already had a template business because I was doing other patterns, so, why would we be cutting fabric out with scissors when I use a template and a rotary cutter? I mean, we use that all the time. What was the difference? So I just, had the templates made to, work with our paper shapes. And so then, I worked on the needles and the thread. So the needles that I use are long and they're fine, and, they do small stitches. You have a fine needle, it's a fine stitch. You do have a big fat crowbar needle, you have a big fat crowbar stitch. And the thread, everybody used a cotton thread. And sometimes they'd use a double cotton thread, which was even worse because, they're afraid it was going to come undone. But the problem with the cotton was when you're dragging the thread across the top of the card constantly, it shreds. So, your quilt's going to fall apart. Who wants that when you've spent, in those days, 5 or 10 years making a quilt? And, I'm a bit hyperactive, everybody knows that. I haven't got time for that. I need to get in and get it done and, see the end result, I enjoy what I do, but I have a few deadlines I need to meet, so I've got to make it quick. So I went ahead and I started using the glue pen. Well, unbelievable. It cut about 75% of my preparation time out of my quilt making. Well, as a designer, every minute counts. When you've got your back to the wall and you've got deadlines to meet, every minute counts. So to cut 75% of your preparation time out is amazing. So for me, it was just like an absolute blessing. So I went ahead and I did that. And, I'd made a lot of quilts the other way, the old traditional way. But then I started making them this way. And then, I started teaching this way, and I started sharing my knowledge and showing everybody what I was doing. And I did come over to, I had been coming over to America for a little bit and doing quilt market, and then I came back with the glue pen method, but I built my business in Europe and I built my business in Scandinavia long before I built my business in the US. Because I very quickly learned that Americans like to make things really fast and big, and they just want to get it done. And while they're picking the fabric out for this quilt today, they're looking at the fabric for the quilt tomorrow. And they're avid machinists. But you know what? Once that glue pen hit the market, it changed a lot of people's minds. And I guess, I wasn't out there, I didn't want to go out there and say, you need to do this hand sewing instead of machine sewing. That's not what it was about. It was as well as. So people can make quick quilts and they can machine, but sometimes you just want to sit down and relax and enjoy the journey. Just sit and, it's good for your soul. It's a carry around project. You can do it at the doctor's, at the dentist, watching your kids play sport when you miss the first goal they ever score. And I've even been known to do it in the movies, much to my son's disgust. But anyway, that's another story. But it absolutely revolutionised it. And I think that, I've taught a lot of people around the world and they've gone on and taught different people. I've taught a lot of people my techniques, and they've become specialists in this as well, because I can't teach everybody, so I teach other people to teach people. But at the end of the day, I know that it was me that did that, and I feel a little bit special in that I know that I have changed that technique and I have helped a lot of people in some small way to have the passion for that technique that I actually have. So, it's a bit of a story, and, that's amazing how things work out. I mean, it was meant to be, so.